All right, guys. So on the left, our evaluation, and on the right was where we are currently, right? And look, there's a lot of things at work. There's some things to work on, obviously, but I think that this is we're getting to a good starting point where we're starting to understand how to simplify things a little bit and work ultimately shorter to it, longer through it, right? And there were a lot of components to Sydney's sequence and her idea of what she was doing as far as swinging the bat that needed a little bit rearranging, right? And this frame right here is the most important for me in showing the difference in what her approach was before and what it is now, right? And that number one, it's easy to see the bat and the hands being in a little bit different position, right? But if you see the lower body, right, she's starting to use the ground much better. Whereas in her old swing, she was really more than anything kind of standing on top of the ground, right? And then most importantly, probably the biggest problem with the overall sequence of the swing of how her full body movement was working is that from that line from the ground to about that point, everything was just turning. All of that back there was just turning together, right? Which normally shows us that a player is going to be a little bit out and around, and their hands are going to be late in this sequence of the swing, right? And so you can see that she's using the ground a little bit better. We have her on her legs quite a bit. I think some of it's a little bit of exaggeration, but nonetheless, I think it's great for her right now to just feel what it means to be in our legs, having lots of flexion in our legs, right? So we can make the correct move and the correct release points with our lower half. I wouldn't get too caught up. I know we worked a little bit on that back foot, moving a little bit as she was going into contact. I wouldn't get caught up in that. I would just continue to, we're working on making sure that that backside is releasing correctly instead of, you see now, there's really no relationship between what the lower half's doing and the upper half, right? Her lower half is getting ready to unload, right? And now her upper half is going to unload, right? Whereas before everything was kind of spinning together, right? So there's some things to work on here in the lower half. Particularly one of the things that maybe needs to be worked out, and please don't do anything before the tryout. Just let her go and hit. But you can see how she stands up a little bit as she's going into contact. She's in a really nice position on the right here. And you're going to see she's going to kind of lift up. Her body is lifting up as that backside's coming through. This is why it's really important that we don't make that back foot move, right? That we don't say, hey, you got to do that on every swing, right? Because imagine a pitch down in the zone, and if she has a tendency of the back foot making her go up, right, it doesn't really affect the barrel. She stays through the zone really well here, okay, but that little bit of standing up, right, can take us over the top of balls quite a bit. So, look, I think she's doing an excellent job, though, with the 4 or 5 sessions that we've worked of making these changes. Most importantly, starting to work to the inside. Out and around on the left has never been a good idea, right? But now that she's improving the sequence, she's starting to get her hands into a better position, and now she's going to work through the ball, which we worked on that extension last night of that feeling of kind of the release of the barrel. I wanted to have a little bit more looseness where she's not steering the bat, but she's really feeling more of an explosion from this point, right, through the ball. Boom, right? So her old swing, and I think I may have said this before, her old swing, she would reach points where you'd say, oh, well, there's her extension. Well, really, there was no extension. It's what I consider a false extension because the barrel's just, she's just constantly working around the ball, right? Whereas now we're getting barrel lag, right, where the barrel's, you see the barrel's behind the hands there, it's behind it, and then boom, she releases through the zone with a lot of explosiveness. She was hitting balls really well last night. I was really encouraged when I was throwing her front toss, the consistency that she had, and the consistency she had in her approach, making sure that she was set up right. As far as the sink move that we're doing, I'm going to go back and kind of separate these. This more than anything right now is trying to get a player familiar with getting in their legs, right? I don't know how much it's adding to Sydney's swing right now, how much power it's adding. But what I'm trying to get her used to is getting a little bit into her legs, whereas her old swing, right, like most kids her age, they're just kind of standing on top of the ground, right, and then they say go, and then they start moving towards the ball, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a feeling where I'm getting into more flexion in my legs. See how she's basically going to be pretty close to straight up here. I think it'd be a great timing move in softball to just build this in so that when the pitcher's doing something, Sydney's doing something, right? And so one of the things we got to watch out for is that she has a tendency of when she's sinking in this motion, and again, it starts with the back foot setup. I give kids such a hard time about this. But if I'm already set up like this, then my knee is set up in this direction. It's just going to take usually that stuff that much longer to get through, right? And so we want to have that back foot squared away, right? And also when we're sinking here, we don't want the knee to go out over the toes, right? You see how she's sinking in or on top of the toes. That move should be inside of the back foot, right? So therefore, when we do that correctly, we get engaged in this back hip a little bit earlier, right? And you're going to see here when she takes off how you can almost feel that her front hip, right, is kind of taking off without her back hip. I need that entire pelvis, this whole region, when she takes off, I need it to move, right? And you see how her front foot is kind of scooting, right? Well, it doesn't give her a problem when she unloads here, but she has a tendency on the pitched ball, right, that she kind of leaves all that behind and she stays stacked on top of that back leg. And while she doesn't squish the bug, where she's not necessarily going to spin like this, she just doesn't get enough release of the backside for what I think she needs. And so that all comes from being too much or too stuck on that back leg. And the sink will create that at times, right? But we got to manage it to make sure that she's feeling the right thing here. And it does come from the setup. I've got to make sure that I'm not set up to where when I sink, my knee's going to go out over my toes. I've got to sink to where that knee stays inside of the back foot, right? And then she's doing a great job for the most part of staying low here. I think part of the reason you see her standing up through this contact is, we've got her hands in a pretty, what some would consider a lower position, right? And so this ball is belt high, and then when she goes to sink, it's a little bit higher than belt high, and so that's probably part of the reason why she's standing up on this. So it's a little bit of an adjustment. But all in all, look, I love what she's doing. I think that she's making a tremendous amount of progress, right? And I think there's some work to do, but we're getting really close to finding a consistent plan for Sydney when she goes up to the plate to do some damage. All right, guys, hey, thanks a lot.